Did you know those stories we tell kids? You know, the ones with poisoned apples and glass slippers? That they were once actually seen as vital survival guides.
Really? Survival guides?
Pretty much. Welcome to the deep dive, where we, sift through the information so you don't have to.
Good deal.
Today, we're really getting into fairy tales. Why were they told? How do modern versions stack up?
Okay, interesting.
Our source for this is a really thought-provoking video transcript. It's from Lost Chord on YouTube called Children Need Better Stories.
Ah, Lost Chord.
Okay.
And this isn't just like nostalgia, is it? It's relevant even if you don't have kids.
Exactly. These stories, they've shaped so much of our culture, so we want to get to the core messages, understand why they stick around, and see if the new ones are doing the same job.
Gotcha. A quick but deep look at this whole storytelling tradition.
Precisely. And this transcript, it really dives into the classics, Little Red Riding Hood, Snow White, Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel.
A big one.
Yeah. And it compares them with a very specific modern take, the upcoming 2025 Snow White movie.
Oh, right, doll.
So, our mission today, pull out the key insight, why these stories started, what the recurring themes really meant, and, what might be getting lost in translation with these updates.
Okay, makes sense. So where do we start? The original purpose, what was it?
Well, what's fascinating and what the transcript really hammers home is that they weren't primarily just for fun.
Not just bedtime stories.
No. The argument is they were actually tools for shaping better adults.
Huh. How so?
By embedding these, fundamental lessons, moral lessons, practical lessons. Think about it. Little Red Riding Hood.
Beware strangers. Obvious one.
Right. Or others warning you to, temper your wants, practice moderation.
Don't judge a book by its cover. Slow and steady wins the race. That kind of thing.
Exactly. Basic survival stuff, really just wrapped up in these imaginative narratives. Don't trust a house made of candy seems silly, but it's about deception. Right?
Yeah, it's not just a surface level warning.
No. The transcript argues it goes deeper. It wasn't just don't talk to strangers. It was about embedding these crucial life lessons where a kid's imagination could really latch on to them.
And remember them.
The danger, like the wolf, it wasn't just a physical threat. It represented a kind of intellectual vulnerability, like naive innocence being exploited.
Okay, so it's symbolic, not just about wolves, but about any kind of predator or deception.
Right. Preparing kids for the concept of danger, moral danger, intellectual, physical, the whole package.
Which, from an evolutionary standpoint, that makes sense. These warnings get repeated. Maybe they boost survival odds. Culture passing on survival tips.
Precisely. And speaking of repeated things, that brings us to one of the really persistent figures.
Yeah.
The wicked stepmother.
Ah, yes. Snow White, Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel. She's everywhere in these old tales. What's the deal with her?
Well, this is where it gets layered. The transcript mentions Bruno Bettelheim first, his Freudian take.
Okay, Bettelheim, what was his angle?
He saw the queen's jealousy of Snow White as basically sexual rivalry, the older woman versus the younger one.
Ah, and the queen's mirror obsession.
Tied into that, a lesson about vanity, envy, narcissism, like the Narcissus myth, the ugliness of those sins.
Okay, that's one interpretation.
Yeah.
But the transcript moves on from him.
It does, yeah, and it explains why. His work, well, it hasn't aged well.
Right. There were issues, weren't there, with his methods and background?
Big issues. The transcript points out that some of his ideas, like the dwarves being permanent pre-masculinity, were, let's say, poorly... and he often ignored bits that didn't fit, like the absent father figure in many versions. But more than that, his whole legacy is kind of tainted now. Accusations, findings really, of faked credentials, abuse, falsified research, even plagiarism.
Wow, so not a reliable source, despite the influence he had. It's a good reminder, especially in social sciences, that influence doesn't always mean accuracy.
Definitely. So if the wicked stepmother isn't just about Freudian jealousy, what's the alternative? Why is she so common?
This is where the transcript brings in the Cinderella effect.
The Cinderella effect sounds familiar, but what is it exactly?
It's a term from evolutionary psychology, I believe. It refers to the statistically higher incidence of child abuse and neglect in homes with step-parents compared to those with two biological parents.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. That's grim. But it's a documented phenomenon.
Yes, and the transcript argues that this pattern in fairy tales wasn't just made up, it reflected a harsh reality.
Which reality?
The competition, especially in tougher times like medieval Europe where resources were scarce. The argument is that a biological parent's drive to protect their own genetic offspring is incredibly strong. A step-parent, well, they don't share that biological imperative.
That really changes how you see Hansel and Gretel, doesn't it? The stepmother pushing the father to abandon the kids during a famine.
Exactly. It frames it not just as generic evil, but as a result of brutal resource competition. It's a chilling perspective, and definitely not the kind of thing you usually get in modern kids' stories. And the transcript uses this to push back against the idea that children's stories should be all sweetness and light. It argues those darker elements were actually vital. They taught caution, even within the family unit, because historically, that could be a real danger zone.
Innocence could be fake.
Pretty much. Which leads us to the next point, modernity, and how our feeling of being safer now might actually be undermining the value of these serious stories.
How so? The idea that we don't need those harsh lessons anymore.
Sort of. But the transcript points out, look, the Cinderella effect still exists today. So maybe we're not living in some perfectly safe end of history.
Right. Problems persist.
Yeah. And this modern pretense of total safety might lead us to just discard these stories that were designed to build resilience, to prepare you for hardship.
There's an irony there, isn't there? The transcript mentions coddling kids from vague dangers, but not actually preparing them for why caution might still be needed.
Exactly. Sheltering without explaining the wolves, so to speak.
And this actually loops back to Bettelheim, interestingly. Despite his flaws, the transcript credits him with one useful insight.
Go with that.
About parents, how they sometimes want kids' minds to work like adult minds, skipping the whole slow development process.
Impatience with childhood.
Yeah. And Bettelheim stressed, and the transcript agrees here, the importance for kids of moving beyond just thinking about themselves, believing they can contribute something in the future. That's crucial for satisfaction.
Developing inner resources.
Exactly. Emotions, imagination, intellect, building resilience, having hope, basically, as something to sustain you through tough times.
Okay, I see the connection. The old fairy tales, even the dark ones, they confronted kids with harsh realities.
But they also weaponized imagination, gave them tools to process it.
Whereas maybe modern, safer stories, they don't build that same muscle.
That's the concern raised, that diluted stories might lead to, well, diminished adults, people stuck in a kind of unreality, unable to really grapple with the world.
The transcript even says adult myths are becoming more childish than traditional children's stories.
Yeah, quite a statement. Which brings up another quirk of the old tales.
Go on.
The lack of wicked stepfathers.
True. Despite stats on male violence being higher generally, why is that?
Well, the transcript notes father figures are often kind of weak or ineffective in these stories. Overprotective kings, like in Little Mermaid or Rapunzel, or the easily swayed woodsman in Hansel and Gretel.
So not exactly figures of threatening power.
Not usually. And the transcript dismisses the easy, it's all patriarchy explanation as maybe too simplistic, prioritizing an answer over just looking at the stories themselves.
Okay, so what's the alternative interpretation offered?
It's quite provocative, actually. It suggests that many of these classic tales, Snow White, Cinderella, Rapunzel, Little Mermaid, are fundamentally about female power.
Female power. How does the wicked stepmother fit into that?
The argument is that the stepmother trope comes from acknowledging the real power women wield over each other and over men. It's not denying female agency, it's exploring its dynamics, including the negative ones.
Yeah, interesting. So it's about power struggles within the female sphere as much as anything else?
Yes, and Snow White is used as a prime example of this, but focusing on the positive aspects of female.
How so? She seems pretty passive in some ways.
But think about what she does. In both the Grimm's and Disney versions, she brings order. The animals flock to her. She teaches the dwarves cleanliness, essentially civilizing their messy bachelor pad.
Right. Okay, I see that. Like Wendy and Peter Pan.
Exactly. Wendy's another example the transcript uses, this maturing, civilizing influence with motherhood presented as the ultimate expression of that feminine power.
So it's suggesting this paradox, with supposed patriarchy, that's actually shaped and sustained by a kind of underlying matriarchal influence.
That's the implication. And the key is the nature of this power in the virtuous characters like Snow White and Wendy. It's unassuming, charitable, comes from inherent goodness, not from scheming or manipulation.
It's influence rather than dominance.
Precisely. Snow White's goal might ultimately be love, finding the prince, but her immediate focus is order, charity, good behavior. The prince, honestly, is barely a character in some versions. He's more like
reward.
Yeah, the moral reward for her virtue.
And the wicked queen's end in the Grimm's tale, the red-hot shoes.
Brutal. But the transcript frames it as a direct consequence of her character. The shoes are almost an extension of her own destructive vanity and envy. It's not just the king's justice. It's like the universe itself reacting.
Contrasting male power may be seen as ruling or protecting, with this female power of creating and nurturing what's worth protecting.
That seems to be the idea, and Snow White's journey itself is seen as a maturation. After the poisoned apple ordeal, she loses that naive sympathy for the queen. Her initial powerlessness, her simple goodness, is ironically her strength. It earns loyalty.
And the queen's weapons, the corset, the comb, the apple.
It is symbolic, right, of risks for growing girls. Vanity, premature sexuality, perhaps. Snow White needs help, yes, but she's worthy of it because her virtue is intact. If she actively sought power, stories suggest it would corrupt her.
So the old tales, according to this view, were showing something profound about female power that maybe modern takes miss.
That's the core argument. They weren't just damsels in distress. They were complex figures navigating different kinds of power.
Which leads us neatly into the critique of the modern adaptations, specifically the 2025 Snow White.
Yeah. The transcript argues that modern versions often just tell you the theme, rather than letting the character embody it through their journey.
Like hitting you over the head with the message.
Kind of. And for this new Snow White, the message seems to be about assertive political power, but the transcript finds it really poorly defined.
How so?
There's this contradiction. It supposedly rejects old power hierarchies, like monarch, but then Snow White seems destined to rule anyway, just based on inherent worth, not really earned through actions or growth in the story.
So her virtue isn't something she develops, it's just assigned at birth. And her challenge is just realizing she's already awesome.
That's how the transcript interprets it. It calls it a mishmash of the heroes and heroines' journey, taking the worst cliches, male-style assertive power-grabbing, combined with the female trope of just inherently deserving love and admiration.
Without the lessons that usually come with those journeys.
Like
overcoming flaws, understanding responsibility.
Exactly. Those mitigating lessons seem absent. Instead, it promotes this vague paean to power for its own sake. Power is something she wants, deserves, and already has, apparently.
The result being a sexless matriarchy.
That's the phrase used, where everyone's equal under the enlightened leader. Unless you disagree, maybe. The lesson seems to be, modern woman, be aware of your innate worth, because that predetermines your right to rule.
That sounds less like Snow White and more like, well, a different kind of story altogether.
The transcript links it to what it calls the modish real-world fairy tale. This idea that young women's voices are inherently brilliant and pure, and any pushback is just sexism.
Challenging that narrative.
Yeah. The transcript basically says, maybe the issue isn't being a woman, maybe sometimes it's just being, quote, an obnoxious prat. It argues this modern Snow White ends up promoting narcissism as a virtue, the exact opposite of the original's message about decency versus vanity.
That's a strong critique. Elevated narcissism. Wow.
It suggests these new stories, while labeled for kids, might be written by adults who either want to skip growing up or think they already have.
And it pushes back against the, it's just a kid's movie defense.
Definitely. It brings in C.S. Lewis's point that a good children's story should resonate with adults too. It's a call to take this stuff seriously.
Because it shapes the future.
Absolutely. So, wrapping up this deep dive, what are the big takeaways?
Well, first, that traditional fairy tales packed a lot more wisdom than we might give them credit for real lessons about navigating a tricky world.
Right. And second, the surprising depth in how they portrayed female power. Not just weakness, it was nuance.
Yeah, definitely not just damsels in distress. And third, the potential downside of modern adaptations that drive for empowerment, sometimes overshadowing actual character growth and moral lessons.
And for you listening, wanting that quick, thorough knowledge, understanding these narrative shifts gives you a richer lens, right? For looking at stories, past and present, and how they might be typed.
Absolutely. It helps you see the underlying messages.
So here's a final thought to chew on. The stories we're telling now. What kind of adults are they meant to fashion? Are we really preparing kids for the world as it is?
Or for some idealized version? What are the wolves in our modern forest? And do our stories give kids the tools, the wisdom, the virtue to actually face them?